They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Inside these walls, silence is enforced, steel doors seal like coffins, and even death is rehearsed. Here the guards aren't just enforcers, they're caretakers of men the state has chosen to kill. This is ADX Florence, where America's most dangerous prisoners await their final judgment, and the officers guarding them walk a line between duty and damnation. Before we step inside this fortress of isolation and control, don't forget, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every week, we expose the hidden world behind bars and the untold stories the system doesn't want you to hear. From the outside, ADX Florence looks less like a prison and more like a bunker for the apocalypse. Hidden in the high desert of Colorado near the small town of Florence, it sits at 6,000 feet above sea level, a maze of reinforced concrete, motion sensors, and automated doors. Locals call it simply the ADX, but for the men who live, or die, inside, it's hell engineered to perfection. Built in 1994 after a string of inmate murders and assaults in other federal prisons, the facility was designed with one goal: absolute control. No human contact. No weapons needed. No escape possible. The compound sprawls over 37 acres, but less than half is visible. The rest sinks below ground, hidden behind 12-foot fences topped with razor wire and guard towers that monitor every inch with thermal cameras. Inside, more than 400 inmates serve time: terrorists, cartel bosses, serial killers, and the condemned men of federal death row. Unlike state death rows, where inmates may spend years appealing their cases in overcrowded units, Florence operates with military precision. Each man in the H unit, the highest security tier, lives in a 7 by 12-foot concrete cell, 23 hours a day. Even the single window is angled upward so they can see only sky, never the horizon. But behind every locked door stands another figure, a correctional officer tasked not just with keeping these men alive, but ensuring they die according to the law. The weight of the watch. For new officers, ADX isn't a job, it's an initiation. Before assignment to H unit, they undergo psychological screening and counter-assault training. Many have already served in high-risk units like USP Marion or Leavenworth. But nothing prepares them for the quiet. Guards describe the sound as a hum in your bones. No shouting. No chaos. Just the mechanical hiss of ventilation and the buzz of cameras tracking every step. In most prisons, officers carry radios and pepper spray. At ADX they carry nothing. Every movement is coordinated through command terminals. 2 officers open one door at a time, and no inmate is ever left alone with a guard, not even for a second. When an inmate must leave his cell, whether for showers, legal meetings, or medical checkups, he's restrained with cuffs, belly chain, and leg irons. Sometimes 3 guards escort one man walking in silence. One officer later recalled, "The danger isn't that they'll rush you. It's that you'll forget who you're dealing with. You start to feel safe, and that's when you make mistakes." Among the inmates here are names that once dominated headlines: the Unabomber, Zacharias Moussaoui, Richard Reed, Jakar Sarnaev. And for a small group, the next step after ADX is the death chamber in Terre, Haute, Indiana. Handling death row. Though executions occur elsewhere, ADX Florence serves as the pre-execution holding ground for federal death row inmates classified as too dangerous or high-profile for standard confinement. Guards must follow strict pre-transfer protocols whenever such inmates are housed here. Every morning begins with a psychological and physical status report. Officers must document inmate mood, speech tone, and even body posture. A flicker of agitation could trigger lockdown procedures. They're trained not only in restraint, but in emotional detachment, a survival mechanism to prevent empathy from turning into hesitation. One former lieutenant described it as guarding ghosts. These guys know they're marked for death. Some accept it, some play mind games. The trick is not to get pulled into their gravity. Officers rotate through contactless zones, where they communicate through intercoms, slide meal trays through steel slots, and monitor inmates on 24-hour camera feeds. Meals are identical every day to minimize potential manipulation or smuggling. Even religious visits occur behind glass. When an execution date is confirmed, ADX guards prepare a quiet transfer. No announcement. No farewells. The inmate is escorted under darkness, cuffed and hooded, into an armored van bound for the federal complex in Terre Haute. The journey is short, but for the officers who've monitored him for years, it feels endless. Psychological toll. Life for the guards is a paradox. They enforce order for men society has condemned, yet they must ensure each man stays healthy enough to face execution, a moral contradiction that slowly erodes them. Many develop hypervigilance, anxiety, or insomnia. Some leave within months. Others last decades, becoming as institutionalized as the prisoners. The Bureau of Prisons has quietly acknowledged this cost, establishing employee assistance programs to treat trauma from extended exposure to high-risk isolation environments. Yet turnover remains high. Few speak publicly. Those who do describe nightmares of buzzing doors and blinking red lights. One veteran summed it up. At ADX you don't hear screams. You hear silence, and that's worse. Life behind the steel. To understand how guards handle death row at ADX, you first have to understand their rhythm. Every action, meals, medication, lights out, is choreographed down to the second. Inmates must respond to verbal cues from unseen officers. If they don't, a team in riot gear stands by within 30 seconds. The officer's creed is predictability equals safety. Because unpredictability is how people die here, guards and inmates alike. So they maintain the illusion of control even as their own humanity strains beneath routine. The result is a grim symbiosis. Men waiting to die, guarded by men trying not to lose themselves in the process. At ADX Florence, time isn't measured in hours, it's measured in doors closing. Each metallic thud echoes through the concrete halls like a metronome marking the rhythm of isolation. For guards, every shift is an endless loop of surveillance, procedure, and silence. For inmates, it's the slow erosion of self, one locked moment at a time. Welcome to H Unit, the heart of the world's most secure prison, and the quietest place on earth. The morning protocol. It begins at 5:45 a.m. sharp. No alarms. No shouting. Just the faint buzz of the security system booting up and the metallic click of the cell lights turning on automatically. Guards begin their shift briefing in the control center, a bunker-like room filled with monitors showing every corridor, door, and cell. Each movement inside the unit is coordinated from here. No one enters or exits without digital authorization. At exactly 6 a.m., 2 guards step into the first corridor, known as the H1 line. They move silently, methodically, stopping at each cell to perform what's called a visual life check. Through the small reinforced glass slot, they confirm. Inmate breathing, posture normal, lights functional, no signs of distress. It takes about 17 minutes to check every cell in the section. In the death row wing there are no greetings. No good mornings. Communication is strictly by code. Guards refer to inmates by number, not name. When a man on death row acknowledges the guard's presence, it's usually a nod or a faint smirk. Some won't even move. They've learned the rhythm too. They know when breakfast comes. They know when the steel slot will open. And they know who's watching them from the other side. Breakfast behind bars. Each meal is identical, calculated by nutritionists, sealed by protocol. Breakfast, powdered eggs, 2 slices of bread, cereal pouch, milk carton. Calories, exactly 1,200. Trays slide through narrow metal flaps called secure passes. Guards wear gloves and never speak beyond short commands. Tray in. Step back. Hands visible. Inmates eat alone in silence. There are no dining halls in ADX. No communal moments. No utensils that could be turned into weapons. Even plastic spoons are counted before and after each use. In some cells, prisoners hoard bits of food or fold wrappers into tiny sculptures, the human mind clawing for something creative amid monotony. Guards are trained to ignore it. Unless it's contraband, it's considered harmless coping. The 23-hour rule. Inmates in H units spend 23 hours locked down. The remaining hour, known as rec time, is done inside a concrete box the size of a garage, roofed with steel mesh. There's no gym equipment, no grass, no group exercise. Just a single chin-up bar and a slit of sky. To escort a death row inmate to recreation, the guards must follow a 7-step procedure. Inmate kneels facing away from the door. Hands cuffed behind the back through the slot. Door opens remotely. 2 guards enter, 1 on each arm. Shackles secured on ankles. Escort proceeds through 3 locked gates. All movements are filmed. The rec yard is surrounded by motion sensors and sound detectors. If the inmate screams, the system logs it. If he stops moving for more than 90 seconds, medical staff is notified automatically. Most use their hour to pace. Some talk to the sky. Others stare at the wall, tracing cracks like constellations. Monitoring the unforgiven. For guards, the routine is precision, not punishment. Every action is written down, every second accounted for. If an inmate so much as twitches differently than usual, it's logged in a behavioral variance report. He laughed today. He didn't finish lunch. He was humming. These micro-observations feed into what psychologists call the behavioral drift program, designed to predict breakdowns or suicide attempts before they happen. Because even condemned men must survive long enough to be executed. Guards learn to read inmates like open books. They know who folds their blanket perfectly, who scratches the walls, who stares at the floor too long. They know the smell of panic, the kind that builds silently before someone tries to hurt themselves. When that happens, the response is immediate. A code blue blares through the intercom. Within seconds, the extraction team, 5 guards in full black armor, storms the cell. Their goal isn't violence. It's control. They pin the inmate, check for pulse, call medical, document everything on body cameras. No one is left alone afterward. For 72 hours, they're placed on psych watch, their cell lights left on 24/7. And yes, officers are required to document whether the inmate sleeps, eats, or even talks. One officer once admitted, "You start to feel like a scientist studying the last days of a species." Mental collapse and control. Inmates under death sentences often develop confinement psychosis, hallucinations, paranoia. A few start hearing voices, imagining that the hum of the air vent is whispering their name. The guards see it all. They're trained to remain detached. But detachment has a cost. Some officers start mimicking inmate habits without realizing it, pacing in straight lines, counting tiles, speaking less. Psychologists call it institutional mirroring. Inside ADX, guards and prisoners are locked in the same system, just on different sides of the steel. By mid-afternoon, the shift has already felt like a lifetime. The hum of the ventilation system replaces conversation. No radios. No background noise. Only procedure. Lunch is served at 11:30 a.m., identical every day. Dinner at 4:45 p.m. Lights out at 9 p.m., though few actually sleep. That's because death doesn't keep time. And in H unit, every man knows it's coming. The midnight watch. At 2 a.m., the most haunting shift begins. The midnight watch. This is when the prison breathes differently. Fewer voices on the radio, fewer footsteps in the hall. But the danger never sleeps. Guards patrol in pairs, flashlights low, boots muffled. They glance through each slit window. Some inmates are motionless, others mumbling in dreams. And sometimes, the beds are empty. A suicide attempt means the entire facility locks down. No one moves. No doors open. Every officer is called in. Because in ADX Florence, a death that isn't scheduled is a failure of the system. The 24-hour loop. When dawn rises again, nothing changes. The same cells. The same guards. The same silence. For outsiders, it might seem like a life of discipline. For those inside, it's a slow form of psychological warfare, waged without bullets or blood. Yet somehow both sides keep going. Because the system doesn't rely on hope. It runs on repetition. And repetition, inside ADX Florence, is what keeps death alive long before it's carried out. 4 years, ADX Florence runs like a flawless machine, cold, precise, and silent. But no system built by humans can hold silence forever. When it breaks, it doesn't just shatter, it explodes. This is what happens when a man condemned to die decides that if his life means nothing, then neither does anyone else's. The breaking point. His name was Thomas Silverstein, a name whispered like a ghost among the guards. Although not technically on federal death row, he lived a death sentence in isolation longer than anyone else in U.S. history, 36 years alone. He murdered a correctional officer in 1983 at Marion, and when ADX opened in 1994, he was one of the first to be transferred there. His cell in H unit became the blueprint for what the Bureau of Prisons called non-contact total control housing. Every inch of his existence, eating, sleeping, even breathing, was under watch. He could go decades without human touch. The staff called him Tommy. The newer ones didn't know his story. But those who did called him something else, the legend of silence. Silverstein once wrote from inside ADX. It's not the physical walls that break you, it's the mental ones. When the mind stops hearing itself, that's when the monsters wake up. His outbursts were rare, but when they came, they reminded the entire facility that even a man buried alive can still fight back. The incident. It happened on a cold morning in 2005. Routine inspection. Same shift rotation. Same hallway hum. Officer Miller, a 6-year veteran, was checking Silverstein's mechanical slot when the inmate refused to step back. Miller followed protocol, gave a command. No response. Second warning. Still silence. Third, then a sudden crash. The steel tray slot slammed shut with a force that split the officer's knuckles open. Blood splattered across the glass slit, bright red against the gray concrete. The unit froze. Within seconds the intercom blared. Code red, H-Unit Corridor 2. Every door in the complex locked automatically. Officers dropped everything. The Special Operations Response Team, SORT, armed in full riot gear, assembled within 90 seconds. For them this wasn't just protocol, it was survival. Through the reinforced glass, Silverstein stood motionless, staring at the blood, eyes empty. No words. No sound. The command center ordered a cell extraction. 5 officers approached in formation, shields up, cameras rolling. The air smelled of disinfectant and adrenaline. When they breached, Silverstein didn't resist. He just whispered, "You made me remember I'm still alive." They found later that his mattress was shredded, his drawings burned into the concrete floor with toothpaste and ash. He had carved one sentence into the wall. "A silent man screams the loudest." The aftermath. No one died that day. But for the guards, something changed permanently. The Bureau reviewed the incident, concluding that isolation can cause behavioral destabilization among long-term segregated inmates. Privately, the staff called it the ghost effect, a state where inmates become detached from reality, existing only as reflections of the institution around them. Afterward, Miller transferred to a medium-security facility in Pennsylvania. He later said in an interview, "You think you're guarding them. But after a while you realize you're guarding what the system created. And that thing doesn't fear death, it craves reaction." From then on, ADX reinforced new psychological monitoring systems. Every officer who dealt with condemned or ultra-isolated inmates was required to undergo quarterly mental health evaluations. Because if the inmates were breaking, the guards were too. The psychology of control. Psychologists studying ADX describe an invisible battle between the officer's structure and the inmate's chaos. Both sides are prisoners of a ritual that repeats endlessly. One former psychologist at the facility, Dr. Craig Haney, explained it bluntly. "You can't spend years in a place where every sound is mechanical and every word is controlled without losing something human, whether you're wearing the uniform or the jumpsuit." Guards begin to develop patterns mirroring the men they watch. Avoiding eye contact. Speaking less. Obsessing over routine. Checking locks twice, then again, then again. It's not fear, it's infection. The system itself seeps into your brain. A second snap. 2 years later, another incident pushed ADX to its limits. Inmate James Elkins, convicted of double murder and awaiting transfer to federal death row, had been quiet for months. He'd stopped talking altogether, even during mental health visits. Then one afternoon, during a routine escort to the rec yard, he suddenly collapsed, then attacked. He used his own handcuffs like a weapon, twisting until they cut into a guard's wrist. Another officer tackled him, dislocating his shoulder in the process. When they dragged him back to the cell, Elkins started laughing, a deep, broken laugh that echoed through the hall. "I wanted to feel something real," he said. He was placed under full observation. 3 days later, he attempted suicide by hanging himself with the drawstring from his shorts. He survived barely. That same week, ADX quietly initiated Operation Reset. All death row inmates were reassessed. Lighting cycles were adjusted. Aromatherapy, yes, even that, was introduced into the ventilation system to calm agitation. But the message to the guards was clear. No one, no matter how controlled, stays normal here forever. The human cost. For the guards, breaking isn't always physical, it's moral. They're trained to maintain detachment, but that detachment corrodes over time. Imagine staring at the same faces for years, knowing each man will either die in a cell or on a gurney, and your job is to make sure it happens by the book. One officer wrote anonymously to the Marshall Project. "You start talking to the cameras like they're people. You look at your reflection in the steel and wonder who's watching who." Some officers resort to black humor to cope. Others drown in silence. Divorce rates are high. Substance abuse quietly higher. The Bureau calls it occupational stress. The guards call it the cost of control. Echoes of the system. The prison administration never publicly acknowledges incidents, unless there's blood on the floor. But internally, these episodes are studied like scientific data points, each breakdown dissected, each outburst logged. Yet behind those statistics are human stories, both prisoner and guard, trapped in a place where emotion is treated as a threat. At ADX Florence, control isn't victory. It's containment. And containment doesn't heal, it just quiets the noise long enough for the next eruption to come. Because in the silence of H-Unit, something always stirs. In most prisons, death comes unannounced. At ADX Florence it's scheduled, down to the minute, the mile, and the breath. For the men in H Unit, the path from life to execution isn't a mystery. It's a procession, a slow, methodical ritual carried out by officers trained not just to move bodies, but to manage the emotional weight of a man's final journey. The call. It begins with a phone call from Washington, D.C. The Federal Bureau of Prisons Central Office notifies the ADX warden that the Justice Department has set an execution date for an inmate currently housed inside H Unit. Only 3 people know at first: the warden, the chief of security, and the operations lieutenant. From that moment, a countdown begins. The protocol is called Operation Final Mile. Every guard involved in it signs a confidentiality agreement. No one, not even most staff members, knows who the condemned man is until the night before transfer. It's designed that way: no leaks, no chaos, no sympathy. The call changes everything. Cameras in the inmate cell are switched to 24-hour recording mode. Lights stay dimly lit all night. And a quiet tension spreads through the corridors, because everyone knows someone's clock just started ticking. The psychological briefing. Before the transfer, guards undergo what's called a pre-execution psychological briefing. A prison psychologist walks them through what they might experience: anger, guilt, numbness, and reminds them to treat the inmate as any other human being until the moment he leaves. It sounds clinical, but the subtext is clear. Do not make him real. One veteran officer once told The Guardian, "It's easier when he's just a case file. The moment you remember his voice or his laugh, it sticks with you. You can't unhear it." They're reminded to speak only in commands. Face forward. Hands visible. Step back. Because familiarity can breed hesitation, and hesitation can get someone killed. The night before. Inmates aren't told immediately. When the warden finally informs them, usually 72 hours before transfer, it's done face-to-face with 2 armed guards present and cameras rolling. There's no ceremony. Just a statement. Your transfer to Terre Haute has been scheduled. Some take it quietly, nodding like they already knew. Others beg for a priest or a call to family. Some smile, an eerie calm settling over them like acceptance. Guards must remain stone-faced. They're trained to avoid eye contact, to never say, "I'm sorry," because empathy is a crack in the armor of control. Still, most officers admit they don't sleep that night. They sit in their quarters, polishing gear that doesn't need polishing, watching the same movie they've seen 100 times. Anything to keep their mind off the fact that they'll soon be escorting a man to die. The morning of transfer. 4:30 a.m., the air inside ADX feels colder. The corridors are empty but the cameras are alive. In the command center, the transport manifest is printed. Inmate number, case ID, transfer destination, escort names, and departure time. Each copy is shredded after review. The team suits up. Kevlar vests. Level 4 gloves. Double-locked restraints. Sealed evidence pouches for property. They move like surgeons prepping for an operation. Precise, sterile, emotionless. In the cell, the condemned inmate is ordered to kneel. Leg irons first, then belly chain, then handcuffs connected by a short link that allows almost no arm movement. A black canvas hood is placed over his head, not for cruelty but for security. It prevents eye contact, disorientation, and possible spitting or head-butting. The entire process is filmed by 2 cameras and logged down to the second. As the cell door slides shut for the last time, the sound echoes through H Unit, a deep metallic sigh that every guard remembers for years. The silent march. The escort team moves through 3 security sally ports. Each door opens only when the previous one is locked. Every guard carries a small earpiece linked to the command center. If the inmate so much as stumbles, it's recorded and documented. At the vehicle bay, a convoy of 3 armored vans waits, 2 decoys, 1 reel. They're identical, windowless, and bullet-resistant. Helicopters sometimes hover overhead during high-profile transfers. The route to Terre Haute is classified. Even local law enforcement doesn't know which road they'll take. Inside the van, 2 guards sit on either side of the inmate. They don't speak. They don't look at him. Only the hum of the engine and the rattling of chains fill the silence. One officer later recalled to Time magazine, "It's the longest drive of your life. You start thinking about your own mortality, your own family. You start wondering what he's thinking under that hood." Arrival at Terre Haute. When the convoy arrives at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana, the ritual continues. Guards from ADX do not enter the main facility. They transfer custody at the perimeter gate, signing over the inmate like evidence. Terre Haute's death house officers then take over. The inmate's hood is removed, his identity verified by fingerprints and facial scan, and he's placed in a holding cell adjacent to the execution chamber. ADX guards wait for clearance, then board their van back to Colorado. No handshakes, no conversations. Just silence. Many never stay to witness what follows. For them, the job ends when the door closes. They don't want to see the curtain rise. The debrief. Back in Florence, the team undergoes a mandatory post-operation debrief. Every detail is reviewed: timing, restraint, integrity, communication clarity. They're asked simple questions like, did you feel unsafe? Did you feel emotional distress? Most answer no, even when the truth is yes. Because in this line of work, showing vulnerability feels like breaking rank. But psychologists who've studied these debriefs say something haunting. Guards who've handled a death transfer often experience delayed moral shock. Weeks later, they'll wake up sweating, dreaming of chains, doors, and the hum of the van. One officer, years after retiring, said, "I've escorted men who murdered without remorse. But I still remember every step I took beside them." That's the part they don't train you for, the ghosts that follow you home. The ritual continues. Every few years another call comes. Another operation begins. Another silent convoy leaves Florence. And with each one, the ritual repeats, the guards performing their duty like monks in a religion of control. Because at ADX Florence, death is never sudden. It's planned, rehearsed, and escorted by men who've learned that the most terrifying thing about the system is how calmly it works. The walls of ADX Florence don't just confine inmates, they echo inside the minds of those who patrol them. For every condemned prisoner locked behind steel, there's a guard on the outside fighting a quieter, deadlier sentence. The slow collapse of the human spirit. This is the story the Bureau doesn't tell, the afterlife of working in a place built for death. The first cracks. Every officer starts out with conviction. They tell themselves, it's just a job. But in Florence, that phrase doesn't hold for long. The rules, the isolation, the endless procedures, all of it starts to sink in. Days turn into months, and the silence of the facility begins to whisper back. Many guards describe the same moment of realization. Standing alone in a hallway, fluorescent lights flickering, hearing nothing but their own heartbeat, and realizing they haven't spoken a real human word all day. That's when the cracks begin to form. Not in the walls but in the mind. One former officer, identified only as SC in a 2020 interview, recalled, "I used to think the inmates were the ones losing their minds. Then one day I caught myself talking to the intercom. I was asking it how its day was. That's when I knew something was wrong. Moral injury. Working death row isn't just about danger, it's about moral injury. Officers are trained to enforce a system that demands detachment, even when empathy tries to break through. Imagine watching a man for years, monitoring his habits, his meals, his breakdowns, and then one morning, escorting him to a van knowing he'll never return. You've seen him laugh, cry, rage. You know the name of his mother, the sound of his cough, and now you must pretend none of it matters." One lieutenant put it bluntly. You spend years keeping someone alive so the government can kill him. Tell me how that doesn't mess with your head. Psychologists describe it as ethical dissonance. It's what happens when your moral compass and your orders pull in opposite directions, until the tension finally breaks. Nightmares and numbness. Most guards don't talk about it. The culture of corrections is built on toughness. But behind that armor, nightmares grow. Common symptoms among former ADX officers include sleep paralysis accompanied by hallucinations of metal doors closing, anxiety triggered by mechanical sounds or alarms, flashbacks during mundane routines, turning off lights, locking car doors, hearing footsteps behind them, emotional numbing where they stop feeling anything, fear, joy, empathy, just to get through another day. Some turn to alcohol, others to isolation. A few simply disappear, quitting mid-shift and never coming back. The Bureau of Prisons officially reports these as resignations due to occupational stress. Unofficially, it's burnout, pure and corrosive. One officer's wife, interviewed by Colorado Public Radio, described living with a ghost in uniform. He'd come home but never really arrive. He'd sit in the dark, staring at the wall. I'd ask what he was thinking about and he'd say, nothing. But I could tell, it was the sound of those doors in his head. The suicide silence. In 2019, a former ADX guard named Michael Brody took his own life after 15 years on duty. He had served in both H Unit and the Special Management Wing. His colleagues said he'd been fine just days before. But his diary, later shared by his sister, told a different story. It's quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that gets inside you. I keep thinking about the men we locked away. The ones who stopped talking. The ones who begged. Sometimes I think I'm joining them, just slower. His death was ruled suicide. The Bureau offered condolences, called it a tragic loss. Then the facility resumed normal operations within 24 hours. Because at ADX, grief has no room in the schedule. Inside the mind of control. To survive, many officers develop what psychologists call institutional empathy control. It's not that they stop caring, it's that they learn how not to show it. One officer described it this way. You don't cry. You don't flinch. You just stare straight ahead. Because if they see it, if they see you care, it gives them power. That mindset protects them inside the walls, but outside it becomes poison. Relationships crumble. Friendships fade. Even family members say they can't reach them anymore. Several former guards have described re-entry anxiety after leaving ADX, feeling unsafe in open spaces, nervous in crowds, startled by laughter. As one psychologist noted, you can't spend a decade inside a place built on control and then walk back into chaos without consequence. Freedom starts to feel like danger. The Bureau's Band-Aid. To address these breakdowns, the Federal Bureau of Prisons introduced programs like the Employee Assistance Initiative and peer support teams. Officers are encouraged to talk about stress and trauma, confidentially, off-record. But the culture resists it. Talking is still seen as weakness. Many officers fear that seeking help will lead to desk reassignment or loss of promotion. One anonymous source said, "You can't admit you're not okay. They tell you to tough it out. But you can't tough out nightmares." Meanwhile, turnover continues to climb. Some estimates say more than 40% of ADX officers leave within 5 years. Those who stay long-term often do so because they've mastered what others couldn't. Emotional detachment so deep it becomes second nature. But even they pay a price. Haunted by routine. One former control room operator told the Marshall Project, "I still wake up at 6 a.m. sharp. I still check locks even in my house. I still wait for the buzz of a door before walking into a room." Routine becomes identity. And identity becomes captivity. In a way, the guards and inmates become mirror images, both trapped in a cycle of control, both haunted by the silence that defines their world. They may walk free at the end of the day, but part of them never leaves. The unseen casualties. The truth about ADX Florence is that it doesn't just claim the minds of the condemned. It also consumes the souls of those who keep it running. Every lock turned, every light switched off, every silent night patrol leaves a mark. A scar invisible to the public but carved deep into the psyche of the people behind the badge. As one retired officer said, "We're trained to guard monsters. But no one tells you what to do when the monster starts living inside you." Behind the walls of ADX Florence, punishment isn't limited to those in orange. It seeps into everyone, the inmates, the officers, even the silence itself. Every clang of a steel door, every unseen escort, every routine shift. It all adds another invisible scar. We often talk about justice. But justice inside a place like this is never clean. It's mechanical, cold, precise. And it costs something from everyone who enforces it. Because in a world built entirely on control, the question isn't just how prisoners survive. It's how the guards do. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden side of America's most secure prison, hit subscribe, because every week we bring you real, factual stories from behind the bars and beyond the headlines. No exaggeration. No fiction. Just truth, cold and unfiltered. Subscribe now to Behind Bars TV for more documentaries that reveal what most never get to see.